Welcome to week 5 of the NFL season. It's the War Room powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe, back in the saddle and with my co-pilot, my regular co-pilot on Sundays, Pat Thorman. Pat, what's going on today, my man?
Oh, I'm excited for the games. I had a kind of a day off of football yesterday up here in the great state of New Hampshire and refreshed and ready to rock.
Yes, I think by DraftKings.com, it quickly goes around so fast here. I had another technical glitch here. It's funny. I don't know if that actually did that come across the show?
Yeah, I heard it.
Wonderful. Never ceases to amaze me how technology makes things so difficult, but so easy at the same time. But anyway, we're going to roll right away, hit the ground running. There's a lot of news to cover here, Pat. I mean, obviously, we'll start. We're not going to bury the lead. The biggest news story, tweet. My Twitter timeline is just flooded with Julio Jones, and he is officially active today. Dealing with a little bit of a hamstring injury. And Pat, there's some concerns here. I mean, obviously, this is a Falcons team that has aspirations to make a deep run. I don't know if they have the defense to be a Super Bowl contender this year, but they're a team who is going to be in the mix, obviously have gotten off to a hot start and have a really impressive offense that doesn't necessarily need to lean on Julio Jones. We've seen the emergence of Leonard Hankerson, obviously Devontae Freeman, and there's a guy named Roddy White who still plays for this team as well. So, what are your thoughts about Julio Jones today? Obviously, I don't think you can fade him in season long, but, also, I guess season long thoughts, DFS thoughts as well.
Yeah, I agree. If you have Julio Jones, you're starting him. You don't have anything that's even close to his ceiling on your bench. But I wouldn't be surprised if they took it easy with him a little bit today. He has been gimpy here and there, throughout the season. Every once in a while, you see him leave the field for a play or two. And I believe they're playing on Thursday night this next week. So they might take it a little bit easy on him. You might want to reduce your exposure in daily. Just a little bit. There are a couple other guys up there, Odell Beckham being one that you can kind of pivot to. But it helps Hankerson a little bit. The Roddy squeaky wheel game might have a little more juice to it. But it's a great matchup, and I still expect them to be throwing the ball quite a bit.
Yeah, it is a phenomenal matchup. That's the thing. I mean, you're talking about a Washington defense that is really banged up. No D'Angelo Hall, no Chris Culliver. I mean, they're down to guys like Bashaud Breeland here, and that's not good for Washington, and it's certainly very good for Atlanta, that passing game. Hey, GPP exposure, sure. I can't justify his price, really. Pat, even early on in the week when there was really no word of this, I was trying to sneak him into some cash game lineups, and even there, the flexibility that you had, it just didn't work out. So that with Julio, certainly be aware of a couple other situations we want to update here. Looks like Carlos Williams could potentially miss multiple weeks with this concussion. We've seen this with a few players so far this season, namely Luke Kuechly. Those IDP folks certainly know that one really well, that he has been sidelined for an extended amount of time with a concussion. So concerning for Williams. Concerning for the Buffalo offense, that means we're going to see Boom Herron, Boobie Dixon, and even some Sierra Wood, which is interesting. That's a deep, deep name. You deep dynasty folks know that name. He was with Houston a season or two ago. But either way, what are your thoughts on Boobie Dixon, Boom Herron, and what we can expect out of the Bills today against the Titans?
Well, I'm a little bit wary of Boobie Dixon. His price is great, and probably won't take him very much to pay that off. But there has been some reverse line movement toward the Titans in this game. So if the Bills get behind, you're going to see more Boom Herron, who's got some history in this offense. He got up to speed pretty quickly. I'd like Charles Clay in this game. For what it's worth. Boobie is a guy that I'm treading lightly with today, even though he's a super value and could be tempting for cash games.
Very tempting, very, very tempting, and it's a couple sites, some of the smaller sites especially. I was finding a hard time to not have him in my lineup because I talked to Mike Clay about this morning, and he said he thinks 12 to 13 touches. If he gets 12 to 13 touches, he will reach value. He will double his salary on a lot of these sites. And if you can get every one of your players to double your salary on FanDuel, for example, you're going to cash. I wouldn't say that about DraftKings. You're going to need a little bit more help than that on DraftKings. But FanDuel, you'll cash. Fantasy Feud, you'll cash. Fantasy Aces, you'll cash. Over and over again, you're going to cash on these sites, and it's really hard to fade him in those situations just because of the wiggle room that he gives you. But either way, good to know there. Also, an interesting bit of news that came across this morning about Darren McFadden expected to be the one who takes over for Lance Dunbar. I think this is a pretty interesting story that not a lot of people are talking about. We know that Christine Michael is certainly there. Christine Michael, potentially the most talented of these running backs, and maybe has the skill set to be a 3-down guy if he could ever get it all together. But, Pat, just thinking maybe for season-long purposes, this is not something we want to mess with for daily or for just in general for week 5. That's a terrible matchup. Anytime a team is a underdog by 9 points at home in an over-under of 50, don't want much of that team. But what are your thoughts on McFadden for the whole season now going forward?
Well, it gives them a little more exposure, a little more of a workload. Obviously they have a good offensive line. They're searching for that guy. Randall's a guy who I haven't been on all off season. He's pretty ordinary. He made that bonehead move at the goal line last week, and he didn't play much after that. They said he's going to come back and get the early down work, which he probably will to start. But I think McFadden's got a good opportunity here. But like you said, I do think Michael's got the best talent out of this bunch. And, I'm hoping he gets a little more run today, probably in garbage time. They said he's going to come in third for touches. So maybe he makes a few plays, opens some eyes, and works out some more playing time for the future. But, it's an offense that's limited. We've seen it the last couple of weeks without Romo, without Dez. Their efficiency is through the floor. So they haven't been able to hold the ball like they were last year. So they need a little more juice, and I'm hoping it's Michael. But specific to McFadden, I think obviously it's a good thing. You'll get a few more touches every week.
Yeah, I'm really hoping it's Michael as well. Yeah, that could be really good for me in a lot of season-long action where I stashed him nice and early. But anyway, and if you're watching this on YouTube right now, remember you can get your questions answered here live from me and Pat. Just use that hashtag War Room. We'll be keeping an eye on that hashtag as we go through the show here. Pat, as we do every weekend, I want to take a close look at the active, inactive, and then we can possibly do, a little kind of micro preview of some of these games, what to expect. And we're looking at, first and foremost, the Chicago-Kansas City game. And on the Chicago side of the ball, well, we have Alshon Jeffrey inactive yet again. Also inactive in this one, Eddie Royal. Not a huge surprise on either one of these, but this makes it pretty interesting for fantasy purposes. And what do you think ultimately is going to be the ripple effect here? Is there any value to be had as a result of these two guys being out?
Well, Wilson gets a little bit of a bump. He's going to get more targets. They kind of don't have anybody else, obviously, besides Bennett and Forte, and give Bennett a little bump. But he's not really someone who's been hurting for targets himself. It's going to be Kansas City. It's beginning of the week. You kind of saw Cutler, and you're like, Kansas City's pass defense is pretty weak. Maybe we can get Cutler his sneaky start, but without Alshon, it's going to be tough for him. I as a ripple effect, I certainly like the Kansas City defense. One of the first times this year. I think that their pass rush is pretty good. We'll see what they do in the back end. Wilson gets a bump a little bit for Bennett and a little bit for Forte.
Yeah, I do like Bennett this week. If you're not going to play Gronkowski, I'm actually not crazy about the Owen Daniels play. The more I look at it, I just don't know if the volume is going to be there just because Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders on that field and also in really strong matchups. So I don't know if we're going to see like what we've seen in the past few weeks where the quarterback's just going to rely heavily on that tight end, Peyton Manning in this case. I just don't necessarily see it. I think he'll reach value, but I'd much rather go with Martellus Bennett if you're not doing the Gronkowski thing. And, hey, I can't blame you if you're not. We love Gronkowski, but we can't love that price this week. So, he's in a few of my lineups. He's not in every single one of them for sure. And I think that's a ripple effect. And you're right, the secondary here is exploitable. It's a shame. Would it surprise me if we see Marcus Wilson have a big game? No, but I'm not going to rely on that at all. I think we could see a lot of Forte here as well. But and I'm not necessarily making that Kansas City play because they're really struggling. This defense is not good, and I don't know if they're going to turn it around today. I would maybe GPPs potentially. Otherwise, I might fade them just because they haven't shown it yet so far this year. And then on the Kansas City side, I'm really only seeing one inactive that sticks out to me as anything relevant to us. And that would be Josh Malga. That means that Ramik Wilson is going to be playing. Now, this just for deep IDP purposes, let's keep an eye and see if Ramik Wilson plays every down. They trusted him every down in the preseason when Malga was hurt, and then they didn't trust Malga in every down. So we'll see if that actually plays out here today. Travis Kelce is going to be active, so that's good news dealing with a bit of a groin and a thumb issue, but no problems there, fired up, ready to go. Pat, couple interesting plays here, and the one that probably sticks out to me the most is Alex Smith. I'm having a hard time keeping Alex Smith out of my top 12 quarterbacks this week. What are your thoughts on him this week?
No, I'm with you. I mean, he makes a pretty decent cash games play if you want to pay down, because Jamal Charles is going to catch a lot of balls. I think Macklin's going to have his way with that secondary. So even there's a negative correlation, but even if you go quarterback, running back, you could see Smith throw a touchdown to Charles, a touchdown to Kelce, and a touchdown to Macklin, and Charles can still obviously make beat his price. So that's kind of a sneaky idea that I've been kicking around.
Yeah, and you have to like home running backs who are favorites and significant favorites. That always bodes positively, especially later in the game. Just rack up those yards. Charles, Lacey, and Devontae Freeman really stick out as players like that this week. Booby Dixon, maybe, but we'll play that one at our own risk. But yeah, I agree, and it's an interesting play, especially for DFS purposes if you want to save a little salary. Looking to the Seahawks and Bengals, a really interesting game for a number of reasons. We have a Bengals team that is white hot on the offensive side of the ball, and defensively have been really impressive in most areas. I'm surprised at how well they're playing across the board. But they have the right players in place, even with the deficiencies they have, especially at linebacker. They're not stacked at linebacker. They're still playing well. And when we look to inactive actives, well, nothing really sticks out. I mean, you see Jeremy Hill is listed as active because he's dealing with a little bit of a knee. Every running back's going to be dealing with something. So no concerns there. But Pat, the issue here is Giovanni Bernard, Jeremy Hill, and we know that certain scripts may favor one or the other. This would seem like a game that potentially would favor Giovanni Bernard, at least on the surface. But then when you look closer, Seattle offensively not playing good at all. They struggle on the road, and Andy Dalton plays really well against teams who don't know him. And so here's a really plus scenario. This might actually be a weird Hill day. I don't know. That's sort of how I'm reading this one. What are your thoughts here with Hill, Bernard, and just the game in general?
I'm not really going out of my way to start either one of them in DFS. I mean, Seattle does have a good defense after all. And like you said, the script does look like it favors Giovanni Bernard. I mean, you look back at the Super Bowl. That was a Shane Vereen game. The Patriots didn't pound Blount very long before they realized that this was a Shane Vereen game. But like you said, I mean, Seattle's in a tough spot here. Cincinnati's really playing well, and if they get behind, that favors Hill. So I'm not particularly high on either one of those running backs, but I'm not dreading them as you probably would guess with Seattle as the opponent.
Yeah, and as good as Seattle is playing defensively now with Cam Chancellor back, I don't think for season-long purposes, if I'm looking at Hill as a flex RB3, I'm not that scared of that play. It's not like I absolutely have to sit this guy. And just let's always kind of keep our finger on the pulse, and let's always kind of try and evaluate things that are happening. I've had people saying, well, Hill isn't playing well. The guy had 3 touchdowns last week, folks. 3, okay? Come on now. What do you expect? You want 3 touchdowns and 280 yards every game. I mean, come on. It's football. It's not Madden, and that's really important to note. And so you're still getting good value out of this guy for fantasy purposes. So let's always keep that in mind. and smell the roses every once and again. But moving to the Seattle side, okay, we'll talk running backs again. Marshawn Lynch is out. We knew that one. We know Thomas Rawls is going to be in the mix, and Fred Jackson is going to be active in this game as well. We saw him get banged up a little bit, but he also looked pretty good for his age. Now I say his age, and he's 2 years younger than me, but for his age, he looked pretty good in that game, Pat. All right, so what are your thoughts here? Rawls, I know maybe you're not looking at Jackson to play, but Jackson's impact on Rawls and then against the Cincinnati defense.
Well, I mean, I think Cincinnati defense, first of all, is a great play. I mean, Seattle's offensive line is a mess. Cincinnati's been getting some pressure. Russell Wilson takes sacks because he's, a lot of scrambling quarterbacks do take sacks, and they really haven't gotten their passing game clicking that much. But as far as Rawls is concerned, he's the guy who burned me last week. I was expecting a little more out of him on Monday Night Football. But with Jackson active, it's going to take a little bit of the shine off him. I mean, he's especially in a game where you expect Cincinnati to be leading, Seattle might be throwing to catch up. That's more along the lines of Fred Jackson. So I would tread lightly with Rawls running behind a bad line as an early down back in a game that on the road where they're underdogs. One guy who was kind of a sneaky play, a long shot play if you want to do a punt, is Lockett, because he's already run back a punt, he's already run back a kickoff. Seattle is still an opportunistic defense. They're playing Andy Dalton. They know he's been playing awesome, but if you can correlate, stack Lockett with Seattle defense. If the defense does kind of rise up and Lockett does bring them back, you get double points on that. So there's something that's not going to have very high ownership that you might want to take a stab at.
Yeah, you're going to have to be creative, though, because Seattle is expensive this week, really across the industry. So it's a tough one. I don't know if I would do the stack per se. I think I might be on a defense like Jacksonville, where you have obviously opportunities for lots of turnovers, and you're not paying that premium price, and you're still going to get that lower ownership. But I do like Lockett. I think, and I agree, the best part about it, too, is if he takes one to the house, you get those points. And then plus, he has a nice matchup this week. He seems to get these matchups. And last week we saw a little bit more Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett, targeting more. And he is the most talented guy in that receiving core. He's the youngest, but he is the most talented. And I think it's only going to continue from here. So I do like that. And Pat had the headline of the week with the Lockets. Very creative. But let's move to Washington and Atlanta. We talked about this a little bit from the Atlanta side already. I'll get to that in a second, but Jordan Reed is going to be inactive in this game, and that means we're going to see Derek Carrier. And we've seen the stranger things out of Washington tight ends in the past where guys, Niles Paul will come out of nowhere and they'll put up some decent numbers. Again, this is a reasonably strong matchup. Justin Durant not playing in this game for Atlanta, so that also bodes well. But Pat, I guess what is the floor ceiling combination for Carrier this week?
Well, I'm not sure what the ceiling is that high, because I'm not sure he's going to get a chance to score very much. But on the PPR site, I expect him to get 8 targets. And against the Atlanta defense, which does have some coverage problems in the middle of the field. I mean, if he gets matched up on Paul Warlow, that's a big advantage for Carrier, who's a pretty athletic guy. And it's a game script that sets up for Washington to be down and maybe down big, so they're going to be chucking it. And so I think between Carrier and maybe some Chris Thompson as well in that script. I mean, he's getting some run and passing downs. Those guys are going to get some action, some easy completions, and on PPR sites could pay off.
Potentially a little Crowder action as well. It's interesting. It's an interesting offense, and this has the potential to yield some fantasy value. So certainly like that. And I guess the secret is officially completely out on Devontae Freeman. Tevin Coleman going to be back in the mix, though, in this game. So I guess the question here is to you, and I know my answer to this question, but to you, Devontae Freeman for real? And also, what would the impact be on his touches with Tevin Coleman back in the mix?
Well, I think you might lose, 5 to 7 touches, at most, at least to start, as Coleman gets back up to speed. But I think Freeman is for real. I mean, he's someone who the PFF graders actually graded positively, even when he looked like he was struggling on the stat sheet at the beginning of the year. He was grading better than Coleman when everybody was all over Coleman. And we've seen since then, since Coleman's been hurt, how much of a quality running back that Freeman actually is. So he's done well. I can't imagine they're going to go to an even split, especially just to start. He's got a tough matchup this week. The Redskins' run defense has kept fantasy running backs in check, and so I do expect more of a pass-heavy attack from Atlanta. But I think it's Freeman pretty solidly now over Coleman, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I agree. He's looking really good, especially in that offense. That really promotes the running back. You drafted Freeman. Good job. You have yourself a nice running back going forward here. Moving to the New Orleans and Philadelphia game. Well, I mean, this is a battle of two really poor secondaries with a quarterback who's returning from injury, looking kind of more like himself a little bit, the 2015 version of Drew Brees. And then on the other side, potentially emerging, I know we say this every week, potentially emerging Sam Bradford. Looking to the active inactives, well, not really much going on here for New Orleans. You have a couple of wide receivers banged up a little bit, Brandon Cooks, Marcus Colston, a little banged up here. But, Pat, any plays stand out to you on the New Orleans side this week?
Well, I think C.J. Spiller is kind of sneaky. Brees' average after target last week, I think it was 4.4 yards downfield, which was the second shortest of any quarterback. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how good his arm is or how bad his arm is, but he seemed a lot more comfortable throwing around the line of scrimmage, which is C.J. Spiller area. Brandon Cooks runs a lot of short routes, and then Willie Snead. Everybody's loving Willie Snead, so I think he's kind of a sneaky play. He's priced pretty well, and this is a game that it's got a high over under. We saw it last week even with Washington. I mean, like, Philly games breed snaps, breed points, and this offense is better than Washington's offense. And Kirk Cousins had a good fantasy day, so I think there's some fantasy goodness here to be had with Snead, a little bit with Spiller. He's priced almost at the minimum still because the prices came out before that Sunday night game where he had that 80-yard touchdown. So I think there's some interesting stuff here. Ingram is going to be. I'm interested to see what goes on with Ingram's targets. How many of those go to Spiller? How many he keeps, because he's been really active in the passing game as well. And Philly's got a pretty good run defense. So I'm a little bit cooler on Ingram this week than I had been. But I no problem playing a lot of guys in this game on both sides.
Yeah, I think that Jordan Matthews is a solid play. I don't know if I'm touching much on that running game for the Eagles. That's maybe the only area where I would fade here. I have some Sam Bradford exposure this week as well. I think that especially on sites like Yahoo, he comes in pretty cheap, and comparatively, players in the same range. Yahoo is a really tough site for quarterbacks so far this year. The quarterbacks just price out too expensively to really justify playing them. So, you have to do some creative things. And, last week I started Colin Kaepernick, and it didn't work out very well. I mean, I still was able to cash in my cash games, but it creates so much more wiggle room though with that particular salary. So it's interesting the diversity in terms of strategies that you have to deploy at each one of these sites. But that's maybe another show for another time. Moving to Cleveland, and with Cleveland, Craig Robertson is going to be out in this one, and if you play in IDP leagues, Christian Kirksey is a guy who I would really look to fire up. The Ravens have been the #1 fantasy matchup for off-ball linebackers so far this year. I unveiled a new tool, sort of, I guess you could call it a tool, at Pro Football Focus. It's the IDP matchup chart. So really gives you all your matchups, even for defensive tackles and cornerbacks, and whether it's a plus or minus matchup. And I also go plus and plus and minus and minus and all that fun stuff. But it's a great resource, so you can really get a sense of who's playing in great matchups here. So sneaky play there. But, on the offensive side of the ball for the Browns, well, we loved this guy in the pre-draft process. We maybe didn't love his landing spot, but he showed last week that he can still definitely get it done in this offense, and that's Duke Johnson. Pat, was that a mirage last week, or are we going to see a little bit more of this Duke Johnson going forward.
I don't think it was a mirage. I think that they're going to need to use him. They don't have a lot of playmakers, and so they need to get him on the field, need to get the ball in his hand. And over the last couple of weeks, he's played more and he's had more involvement. That touchdown catch was a heck of a catch. That was that Willie Mays style bomb in the end zone. It was a nice throw by McCown. McCown's actually played pretty well the last couple of weeks. So I'm on Duke in PPR, and I think he has a pretty good game here. It's a tough spot on the road. You think Baltimore is going to be leading, and that sets the game script up for Duke Johnson a lot more than Isaiah Crowell. So yeah, I'm not on Gary Barnidge. I think that ship is sailed at least for a week. Baltimore is really tough on tight ends. They're the best in the league. So I'm running away from Gary Barnidge. But on the Cleveland side, Duke Johnson is definitely the play.
Yeah, and if you grabbed him early and you listened to us, you got a good running back there who's just such a dynamic athlete, an all-time leading rusher for the Miami Hurricanes. You might have heard of that college before, but going to the Ravens, and boy, oh boy, Steve Smith, Crockett Gilmore. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Brashad Perriman, we don't know when we're ever going to see this guy. So what do we do here? Obviously there's opportunity in any situation potentially if you look at it the right way. So is there opportunity here with the Ravens, Kamar Aiken, Max Williams? Are these guys you roll the dice on? Also, an intriguing over or under for Justin Forsett. I think Vegas has his over under at something like 82.5 yards, which that's high. That's really high for a running back. And that tells me this could be a potentially good day for Forsett.
Yeah, I think it was the highest of the week or tied for it. And yeah, I wrote Forsett up in advanced matchups this week. I'm definitely on Forsett. If you're going to attack Cleveland, you attack them on the ground. Although they actually haven't been all that hot through the air lately, but they're weaker on the ground against the run game. So and like you said, there's not a lot of other targets in that offense right now. Aiken's a kind of a sneaky play. Max Williams is a kind of a sneaky play. I'd love to see them get Darren Waller on the field. I think he's certainly athletic. He's big. I think he can make some plays for them. I'm not sure if he's quite ready. He was pretty green coming out of Georgia Tech. But Forsett, they're going to throw him the ball. He's going to hand him the ball. My only concern would be red zone work if Taliaferro is going to get some touches in the red zone at Forsett's expense. But the volume is kind of mitigating that worry, at least for this week.
And also his performance last week. I mean, you have to like that. I know a lot of Forsett owners were worried. I wouldn't be worried. It's just a product of this offense a little bit. But a strong matchup, and certainly you're going to feel confident using him today. Not much to say about the Rams and Packers. We're coming down to the last 2 minutes here. No surprise inactive actives here, really. Not that I'm seeing. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. You know who you're starting out of that group. Todd Gurley is for real, okay? So you're starting him. And going, basically chalk with that game. We talked about the Bills-Titans already, so that leaves us last and certainly least, the game of the week, the Jaguars and Buccaneers squaring off in a showdown of the basement. And, what we have here, I mean, I guess with the Jacksonville side, there's some opportunity with Blake Bortles, sure. Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns, you have these guys. Hurns is active too, by the way. I know there was a little concern there. You have these guys, you're going to roll with them. Julius Thomas is going to be active, but he's going to be on a pitch count, so you're not worried about him. But I'm more concerned with the Tampa Bay side, Pat. So to close this show out, we'll talk Buccaneers football. And Jameis Winston and Mike Evans in that passing game. Do you think that there's some value to be had here this week, or are we going to get another 3 or 4 interception game out of Winston?
There could be 3 or 4 interceptions, and he could throw 2 or 3 touchdowns as well. I mean, I think they're going to be chucking the ball. Jacksonville's run defense, despite what the Patriots did to it a couple weeks ago, is kind of plucky. They're not a complete pushover. So I think Martin might not have as many running lanes as they'd hope. So I think Evans is priced really cheap. He's still getting a ton of targets. Vincent Jackson kind of got off last week a little bit. So I expect Winston to be, chucking it, and you can take the good with the bad on it.
Yeah, I agree. You kind of just have to roll with it. The best thing about him is, and there's a phrase we say in basketball, shooters shoot. Like, so if you're a shooter and you have an off game, you're missing, it doesn't mean you stop shooting. You just keep shooting, and eventually it's going to go. He's a passer, and passers pass, and the fact that he's not shying away, the fact that he's not, I might get picked off, I better check down. No, he's not doing that. And that's what you love to see out of a kid like this. And again, let's look at ourselves in a reality sense here, not in a sense of Madden or video games or anything like that. He's a rookie, okay? It's going to take a little time with Jameis Winston, so I don't want to hear it out there that he stinks or something like that. Jameis Winston is going to be a good quarterback. I don't know how – a great quarterback. I don't know if I'll go that far. He's going to be a good quarterback in the NFL, and you have to love the moxie that he has, that he's not backing down to any defense. He's going to fire that ball in, even into quadruple coverage. That's what he did last year. Rashad Green. Where's Green? I got to throw him the ball. But anyway, that's going to do it for us this week. So if you tuned in on YouTube, thank you very much. Best of luck to you in all of your fantasy action, whether season long or daily. Remember, check out the site profootballfocus.com for all your football needs, not just fantasy, NFL, and college as well. And tune in, of course, to all the great shows on PFF Radio. You can subscribe on iTunes and listen on Blog Talk Radio and Stitcher. And also check us out on Sirius XM weekdays, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern, and then also on Sundays as well. Same time slot there. So for Pro Football Focus, I'm Jeff. He's Pat, and that's a wrap.